Welcome back to comicbookadvocates.com on Geek Radio America. And right now we're going to introduce you to our brand new segment. It's 10 minutes of advocacy, where I'll take 10 minutes to talk to someone or advocate for something. This week we're going to start off, since this is our triumphant return to Geek Radio America airwaves, and we want to advocate across the airwaves. We're going to start with me. So you guys are going to know a little bit more about Mister AnderSiN. So who am I? I'm a comic book fan who started off watching a pilot episode of something called The X-Men, Pride of the X-Men. It was this pilot program that I was watching at 6 o'clock in the morning on probably WPIX, Channel 11, maybe Channel 5. I don't even think Channel 5 at that point was Fox. This is the extreme late 80s. We're talking 89 to 90. This came out. At that time of my life, I was dealing with a lot, both the home life that we're not going to go into, but I was also dealing with things at school where I was having trouble keeping up with my classmates. As a matter of fact, they told me I wasn't a very intelligent person, and I'm putting that very nicely. I grew up in Queens, Board of Education, late 80s, early 90s. Trust me, they weren't worried about kids' feelings. I was told that I would have to go into special education. My father advocated for my intelligence and said there's no way that child needs to be in special ed. You're missing something. He is an intelligent young man. That is one of the moments that I'll always cherish between me and my dad, the fact that he fought for his son. So now at this time, I watched this show about these X-Men who are freaks and not getting along and having problems fitting into society, and none of them were really meant to be around. That's how I felt in school. Not only was I having trouble, but I wanted to talk about what was on the news. I watched the news, and the kids around me just wanted to talk about kid things that I wasn't always into. Don't get me wrong, I love Transformers and He-Man, but some of the things they were talking about just didn't interest me, or wasn't the life that I was living, because we all grow up a little differently. The situations they had weren't always the situations I had. So this world I wanted to be part of was the X-Men, and I found out it was just a pilot. And at the point, I didn't know what a pilot was. All I knew is there was never another episode. For a month, it was always the one episode. And it was cartoons first in the AM. And now, as an adult, I can tell you that they did it. Stan Lee did it as a way to option X-Men. And of course, later on, just a few years later, we would see the actual X-Men series make it to Fox. But at this point, that wasn't a possibility. And thank God it wasn't, because what happens next, I got credit for saving my actual life. So what I did is I went to this thing called the All Nightstand. And the All Nightstand was basically a newspaper rack or a news shop. I don't know, or a magazine store. Nowadays, you're all shaking your head. What do you mean, the thing in front of the Target checkout? No, there used to be stores that basically sold milk, batteries, newspapers, magazines, cigarettes, and some sodas. That was it. That was the extent of it. Maybe some cookies, maybe some donuts. It was like a snack shop basically at the airport, but it was a building. And I went to this building looking for the X-Men because I realized at the back of that thing it said Marvel. And so I was so excited. I was like, I know what Marvel is. Spider-Man. I've seen a Spider-Man comic. And at this point, my dad had even bought me a Batman comic. It was the one where Robin died. Talk about being brought into comics the hard way. Batman died, and I don't think my dad knew that Batman was going to die at the end of it. Actually, he hadn't died yet. We had the 800 number. That's a whole different program for another day. But my dad read it to me, and that's always going to be one of those moments I cherish about comics, because later on, I would get into comics. And when I got into comics, I would literally have to learn to read by using a dictionary on the left-hand side and a comic on the right-hand side. That is how I learned to read. As an adult now, I owe everything to comics with my literacy, and it helped me get to know big words. To this date, I still talk about the power of comics in kids' hands and how it can inspire literacy in children for that very reason. And my dad inspired it. He saw that there's something that came alive in the school system. eventually gave me an IQ test after my dad's protesting. And it turns out all those remedial classes they were putting in were wasting my time. I shouldn't have been in remedial classes. It was the way they were teaching. A dyslexic kid would never work. I actually had a high IQ. In fact, I had the highest IQ in the building, and I was in a gifted school. Board of Education had failed me, but comics hadn't. They had inspired me to learn to read. And within just a year, I went from failing the reading tests at my age to being able to read college level. And from that point on, any state test I ever took for reading, it was the top. I was in like the 2%, the 3%. My parents were so proud. My dad was so proud. But my dad encouraged me to keep reading comics because he had seen what it had done for me in just 1 year. I didn't become a straight A student. I had a lot of trouble with school still. I had a lot of trouble learning the way they wanted me to because not only did I have dyslexia, but ADHD, but I had an escape now. I had an escape for all the things that were happening in life. I could escape to comic books. And let me tell you, that was the best thing. And I recently said, now in my 40s, as a creator of comics, that I still escape into worlds, not just written by other people, but I can escape into my own as I write. So one of the things I've always wanted to do as a creator is to create character-driven stories. I wanted to talk about humanity. I love the comic books because of the characters. It was the characters that made me care. So I went in and I wrote characters, and I've written things about the New York City underground. I've written about farting elephants, the power of kindness. I've written about bullying, and I have a divorced duo who have to work together to co-parent. Of course, the thing I'm most proud of is Cat Dad and Supermom, because that inspired my child to literally stop ripping up comic books. And I can tell you right now, just an amazing story. My son at the library at his school fell in love with these books, and the teacher told me he gets upset when he goes to the library and the books aren't there. The books aren't there, and he won't get another book. So I said to the teacher, "What's the name of the book? I'll go buy it." She said, "Really?" I'm like, "Yeah, because if I buy it for him and he knows he has it, he'll open his mind and explore more." This book is called Dave, and it's a series about this kid David, and him getting in trouble and all that. And Jax loves it, and it looks like a comic book. It looks like a giant comic book, and I'll tell you, for a guy who sells my comics for $7, and that book I bought was 17 each, I think I might be in the wrong industry. No, I love comics too much. I'm kidding on that, but I am very proud to say that on that journey, it took me to be part of comic book school, helping other creators learn. I got to make the book where my son walked into a bookstore yesterday, loving books. That started in my mind, all because I fell in love with comics, and I shared that love with my son, and I helped bring him out of autism. I have the teachers and his therapist always asking me, how did I reach my son? And I always say, through the love of comics, compassion, and caring. So as a creator, I create things about humanity. I try to look at the world, and I try to let people look at the world. We talk about different things. Creating is just something, even as a kid, I wanted to do. Is even with the inability to write and really express, I could come up with stories in my head. I just couldn't write the words down the right way. They were always jumbled. I express myself through my comic creations. So who am I? I've had a lot of nicknames at this point. People have called me a comic book advocate, and that's something anyone can be. But most importantly, I'm a kid who learned how to read thanks to comics. You can find out more about me and my creations by going to MrAnderSiN.com. Check out Continuum Comics, where me and my partner, Mike Seeley, are creating some very different stories together. And it's a partnership that I've waited my whole creative life to have. So I'm very thankful for that. I'm thankful for every person who's ever supported my campaigns, and I appreciate it. But I also want to help other people rise up. That's why I'm with Comic Book School. You can be part of that too. If you're a creator looking to get the next step up, go to comicbookschool.com. I also run comicbookadvocates.com. That's how I became a comic book advocate. But at my heart, I'm a kid who loves comic books because they saved my life, and they helped bring my son out of the shadows of his autism. And you can find out more about my journey by following me across everything. Mister AnderSiN. That's AnderSIN. Across all the social medias, and even on TikTok. Continue listening to this program. We'll bring you some other great guests over the next couple weeks. And remember to go out and support comics. They're a gateway to literacy for children. This has been an edition of comicbookadvocates.com on Geek Radio America. Stay tuned for more